9/11, yes, Central Standard Time. My grandmother's birthday was actually on September 11th, but that's a story for another day. Hi, welcome. Welcome back. I am Ashley Gemini, and this is the series where I read one of my favorite books, truly, certainly one of the books that I've read the most in my adult life, The Will to Change, Men, Masculinity, and Love by the incomparable Bell freaking Hooks. If you don't know about Bell Hooks, get your life. Get your library card, follow the social distancing procedures. I don't know about y'all, but the New Orleans Public Library has really outdone itself with just everything. I will be filming live due to some laptop issues for this chapter and maybe the next chapter as well. So I'm going to try to cut the tangents down since I can't cut them out of the video. At least I don't know how. But today we will be reading chapter 3, Being a Boy. And yeah, when I think about being a boy, or when I think about boys, I think about playfulness. And so I wore my fun captain's hat. Hi. And I think about the color blue because gender stuff, I guess. I don't know what this sugar has to do with anything. I just think it's really cute. And it, baby pink goes with baby blue, right? Like, why are we even talking about binaries? But here we are. I don't know why that's distracting, but I am going to close my bathroom door. Oh yeah, I get to enjoy my Bad Girl Sandy tights, if you're familiar with Grease. Spirit wants me to tell you that story. I bought these incredibly cheap yoga pants from the beauty supply store, same one where I got my fabulous wig that I wore in the last episode. They were probably about, definitely less than $10. They barely fit, but it was an emergency. I had a Saints game to get to, and I didn't have any black pants, so here we are. And is there anything else I want to talk about, or anything I want to say about this chapter before I read it? A note on penis envy. So Freud, dear Uncle Siggy, he postulated that a woman was not psychologically or psychically complete until she gave birth to a male-bodied child, because in Victorian Europe, and to some extent all of the many cultures that Victorian Europe colonized, including the United States, devalue everything feminine to the point where he postulated it was only natural that women would feel some sort of lack, that little girls, when they see a boy and understand, like, oh my gosh, there are people with penises out there, well, where's mine? They would automatically assume that theirs must have been cut off or something, and so your whole adult life and even your childhood is this quest for the penis. That's why heterosexual women want men in the first place, is because they need to own a penis. I think that's all a metaphor for power, right? Because I think that children are just so accepting of whatever reality they're faced with, and they're closer to their animal nature, so they understand biodiversity. They understand that, like, hey, people are just going to be different. And it's not a big deal until we make it a big deal. And as far as my own gender journey, as a girl, like, I'm a pretty feminine person. Like, this is what I'm wearing in the About a Boy chapter. Look. So, you saw my skateboard in the thumbnail. It's got pink wheels, okay? Like, I'm a pretty feminine person, but I also really liked Tonka trucks. Like, I really loved playing with my cousin's Tonka trucks. And I didn't feel like I was allowed to ask for them for some reason. That also could just have to do with socioeconomic status and just sort of being raised to accept what you're given and not really ask for or expect more. But one thing I will say is I've never, ever been a fan of baby dolls. And I remember up until maybe age like 6 or 7, I had like 3 or 4 or 5 baby dolls in the closet. And I'm like, why do y'all keep buying me baby dolls? It's not, but baby dolls just weren't my jam. It says my connection is unstable, and now it says it's not. Bet. So that's all I have to say about being a boy. I am not transgender. I am a cis woman. And I don't have any siblings, so I really don't understand what it is like being a boy. I have a couple of friends with sons, but they're not here right now. And you came to watch me read bell hooks in my lingerie, so here we go. 601. I will make a note of that in the description. Let's get right into it, girl. I read the first sentence in my last video because it's a good one. Watch. That's nervous laughter. What I'm about to say is not funny. Chapter 3, Being a Boy. Boys are not seen as lovable in a patriarchal culture. Even though sexism has always decreed that boy children have more status than girls, status and even the rewards of privilege are not the same as being loved. Patriarchal assault on the emotional life of boys begins at the moment of their birth. I would argue the moment of their conception, but hey, I'm also going to full screen this because I'm a very easily distractible Gemini. Great. And if you can hear the rain in the background, just chalk it up to ASMR. I have no control over that. It's been raining all day. Anyway, it's an uncomfortable topic. I'm noticing that maybe I'm trying to get away from this a little bit. But yeah, patriarchal assault. According to bell hooks, patriarchal assault on the emotional life of boys begins at the moment of their birth. Contrary to sexist mythology, in the real world of male and female babies, male babies express themselves more. They cry longer and louder. They come into the world wanting to be seen and heard. Sexist thinking at its worst leads many parents to let male infants cry without a comforting touch because they fear that holding baby boys too much, comforting them too much, might cause them to grow up wimpy. Thankfully, there has been enough of a break with rigid sexist roles to allow parents to reject this faulty logic and give boy babies the same comfort that they give or would give girls. In recent years, it has become clear to researchers working on promoting the emotional life of boys that patriarchal culture influences parents to devalue the emotional development of boys. Naturally, this disregard affects boys' capacity to love and be loving. Dan Kinlan and Michael Thompson, authors of Raising Cain, Protecting the Emotional Life of Boys, stress that their research shows that boys are free to be more emotional in early childhood because they have not yet learned to fear and despise expressing dependence. Quote, every child, boys included, comes into this world wanting to be loved and love. Okay, I gotta say it again. Every child, boys included, comes into this world wanting to love and be loved by his parents. 40 years of research on emotional attachment shows that without it, children die or suffer severe emotional damage. End quote. Despite these powerful insights, they do not talk about the impact of patriarchy. They do not tell readers that to truly protect the emotional life of boys, we must tell the truth about the power of patriarchy. We must dare to face the way in which patriarchal thinking blinds everyone so that we cannot see that the emotional lives of boys cannot be fully honored as long as notions of patriarchal masculinity prevail. We cannot teach boys that real men either do not feel or do not express feelings, then expect boys to feel comfortable getting in touch with their feelings. I actually have this highlighted in my book. My roommate's in the kitchen right now, and wow, the distraction is on 100. But there is something that I want to say about this. We cannot teach boys that real men either do not feel or do not express feelings, then expect boys to feel comfortable getting in touch with their feelings. That's so true. As someone who has loved men and who has attempted to love men but failed because they can't get in touch with their feelings. The first time I read this book, it gave me a lot of empathy. It gave me a lot of perspective, specifically with points that she makes like this one, where women and men and anyone who's attempting to be in an intimate relationship with a man, not physically intimate, that's easy. It's literally like hailing a cab. But anyone who wants to connect emotionally with a person who is raised male is going to run into some trouble because everything about their gender identity from birth is teaching them that real men either do not feel or do not express their feelings. So that sounds like the point I was trying to make. Moving on. Much of the traditional research on the emotional life of boys draws the connection between notions of male dominance and the shutting down of emotions in boyhood, even as the researchers act as though patriarchal values can remain intact. I'm just going to pause really briefly. Bell Hooks makes this point over and over again about a lot of her citations, with the exception of like Terrence Real, maybe one or two other people. Nobody names patriarchy as the problem. People are like, men are the problem, or violence is the problem, or dominance is the problem. And nobody wants to name patriarchy as the problem, at least in 2004. Nowadays, I feel like more and more people are calling out patriarchy, but moving on. Like acting as though patriarchal values can remain intact. Come on. Popular best-selling books such as Raising Cain and James Garbarino's Lost Boys, Why Our Sons Turn Violent and How We Can Save Them outline the way boys are being emotionally damaged, but they fail to offer a courageous alternative vision. One that would fundamentally challenge patriarchal masculinity. Instead, these books imply that within the existing patriarchal system, boyhood should be free of patriarchal demands. The value of patriarchy itself is never addressed. In Raising Cain, the authors conclude by contending, quote, "What boys need, first and foremost, is to be seen through a different lens than tradition prescribes. Individually and as a culture, we must discard the distorted view of boys that ignores or denies their capacity for feelings, the view that colors even boys' perceptions of themselves as above or outside a life of emotions." End quote. Kindlin and Thompson carefully depoliticize their language. Their use of the word tradition belies the reality that the patriarchal culture, which has socialized almost everyone in our nation to dismiss the emotional life of boys, is an entrenched social and political system. It's not just a tradition, like putting up a Christmas tree for Christmas is a tradition. Lighting candles for Kwanzaa or Diwali or Hanukkah is a tradition, right? The belief that boys shouldn't have emotions or shouldn't express them except anger and except in particular contexts is patriarchy. It's an entrenched political and social system. Thank you, Bell Hooks. Moving back on, because she has words, y'all. Back to the book. Their use of the word tradition belies the reality that the patriarchal culture, which has socialized almost everyone in our nation to dismiss the emotional life of boys, is an entrenched social and political system, nor is it an accident of nature. Anti-feminist women, like Christina Hoff Sommers, curry patriarchal favor with men by spreading the idea put forward in Sommers' book, The War Against Boys. Oh God. That, quote, feminism is harming our young men, unquote. Sommers falsely assumes that educating boys to be anti-patriarchal is... it's hard to say that out loud. Clearly, these are not Bell Hooks' words. She quotes Sommers when she says, wow, Sommers falsely assumes that educating boys to be anti-patriarchal is resocializing boys in the direction of femininity. Okay. Bell Hooks goes on. Conveniently, she ignores that feminist thinkers are as critical of sexist notions of femininity as we are of patriarchal notions of masculinity. It is patriarchy, in its denial of the full humanity of boys, that threatens the emotional lives of boys, not feminist thinking. To change patriarchal traditions, we must end patriarchy, in part by envisioning alternative ways of thinking about maleness, not only boyhood. Yes, yes. Moving on. Without ever using the word patriarchy, he uses the phrase traditional masculinity. Psychologist James Garbarino does suggest in Lost Boys that the cultivation of an androgynous selfhood, one that combines the traits deemed masculine and feminine, would affirm for boys their right to be emotional. In his section on What Boys Need, Garbarino writes, where and how do boys learn what it means to be a man? They seem to learn it all too often from the mass media and from the most visible males in their community, particularly their peers. Boys' friends are the arbitrators of what is masculine and what is feminine. So resilience among the boys in a community depends upon changing macho attitudes among male peer groups and broadening their concept of what a real man is and does, end quote. Garbarino's is a powerful work, very much on target in the descriptions and information it offers about all the ways boys are traumatized by the demand that they deny their emotions. But it is also a disturbing one because the author himself seems unwilling to connect his recognition of the damage done to boys with a critique of patriarchal thinking and practice. It is as if he believes that somehow all that is needed is a revamping of patriarchal values so that boys' emotions can be supported, at least until the boys grow up. Frankly, Bell Hooks, when have you been anything but frank? Frankly, it is difficult to understand why these men who know so much about the way patriarchal thinking damages boys are unable to call the problem by its true name, and by doing so, free themselves to envision a world where the feelings of boys can really matter. Perhaps they are silent because any critique of patriarchy necessarily leads to a discussion of whether conversion to feminist thinking and practice is the answer. It has been hard for many male thinkers about the emotional life of boys to see feminism as a helpful theory, because to a grave extent, anti-male sentiments among some feminists have led the movement to focus very little attention on the development of boys. That is a good point. Not all feminist spaces are safe spaces for men to talk about boyhood. You could also create male feminist spaces so that you wouldn't have to be around a bunch of women who have a lifelong history of male-based trauma, but whatever. I mean, they have to learn somewhere. I do think that feminist spaces ought to be a lot more inclusive to people of all genders and sexes, but you know, it's not just me. It's just a theory, just an idea. Your body, your choice, right? Back to bell hooks. One of the tremendous failings of feminist theory and practice has been the lack of a concentrated study of boyhood, one that offers guidelines and strategies for alternative masculinity and ways of thinking about maleness. Indeed, the feminist rhetoric that insisted on identifying males as the enemy often closed down the space where boys could be considered, where they could be deemed as worthy of rescue from patriarchal exploitation and oppression, as were their female counterparts. Like the researchers who write about the emotional lives of boys from a non-feminist perspective, feminist researchers are often willing or reluctant to target patriarchal thinking. Family therapist Olga Silverstein in The Courage to Raise Good Men says little about patriarchy, even as she does offer alternative strategies for raising boys. There are two major barriers preventing researchers from targeting patriarchy. Researchers fear that overtly political analysis will alienate readers on one hand, and on the other hand, they may simply have no alternative visions to offer. Shots fired, Belle. I hear you. And that's valid. That's valid. Researchers are barred from targeting patriarchy because they fear that overtly political analysis will alienate readers, and or they simply have no alternative visions to offer. We were all raised in this fishbowl where patriarchy is the norm. Like, it's a challenge to think of another way of living. Worth it. Maybe research into some pre-agricultural societies and how they were organized, but what Native Americans, what indigenous people of all the places that were colonized by Europeans? Bringing it back to Freud, huh? Anyway, I'm just scattering the seeds around. Some of the seeds will be eaten by birds, some will be trampled by oxen, some will flourish into mustard bushes. Name that parable if you know, you know. Anyway, back to bell hooks. Feminist theory has offered us brilliant critiques of patriarchy and very few insightful ideas about alternative masculinity, especially in relation to boys. Many feminist women who birthed boys found themselves reluctant to challenge conventional aspects of patriarchal masculinity when their boys wanted to embrace those values. They found they did not want to deny their sons access to toy guns, or to tell them to just be passive when another boy was attacking them on the playground. For many enlightened single-parent feminist mothers with limited economic resources, the effort to constantly map for their sons alternatives to patriarchal masculinity simply takes too much time. One of my very best friends is a single mother with 2 children, an older daughter and a younger son. When her son was born, I suggested we name him Ruby. His biological dad, which, by the way, if one of my best friends is a single mother, why is his biological dad even... Anyway, just listen. His biological dad jokingly made the point that she should have her own son and name him Ruby. Did somebody ask him for his opinion? Because my biological dad, or at least the guy on my birth certificate, he was asked for his opinion on what my mom would name me. He gave her a list. She chose Ashley. Thanks, Mom. I mean, she's not in heaven. She's in North Carolina, but thanks, Mom. So you know, it's all right to have an opinion. He is still your son, but like, you clap at bell hooks, she claps back at you in print form all over the world, now on the internet. I love it. I love it. She should have her own son and name him Ruby. Bell hooks goes on. Well, his middle name is Ruby. When he was around the age of 5, he decided he wanted to use the name Ruby. Who's laughing now? I'm laughing now. Moving on. The boys at school let him know through teasing that this was a girl's name. As an intervention, he and his mom brought to school pictures of all the men through history named Ruby. Then later on, he wanted to paint his nails with fingernail polish and wear it to school. Again, the boys let him know that boys do not use nail polish. His mother and sister gathered all the cool adult guys they knew to come to school and show that males can use nail polish. These were my friend's graduate student years. However, when she began working full-time, such vigilance became harder to maintain. Just recently, her son told her how much he likes the way she smells. She shared with him he could smell the same. Let her know that there was no way he could go to school smelling sweet. He had gotten the message that boys don't smell good. Instead of urging him to rise to the latest challenge, she now allows him to choose and does not judge his choice. Yet she feels sad for him, sad that conformity to patriarchal standards interfered with his longings. Many anti-patriarchal parents find that the alternative masculinities they support for their boy children are shattered not by grown-ups, but by sexist male peers. Live television. It's not corona, I promise. It was just a saliva water vapor I inhaled. Don't inhale, kids. Right. Progressive parents who strive to be vigilant about the mass media their boys have access to must constantly intervene and offer teachings to counter the patriarchal pedagogy that is deemed normal. And How Can I Get Through to You? That title, Terrence Real, he's a real one, pun intended, but that title gets me every time. Forgive the combination of thunder and pots and pans. Just divine time, everyone. In How Can I Get Through to You? Terrence Real, father of 2 sons, states, "Our sons learn the code early and well. Don't cry. Don't be vulnerable. Don't show weakness. Ultimately, don't show that you care." As a society, we may have some notion that raising whole boys and girls is a good idea, but that doesn't mean that we actually do. Even though you or I might be committed to raising less straitjacketed kids, the culture at large, while perhaps changing, is still far from changed. Try as we might, in movie theaters, classrooms, playgrounds, our sons and daughters are bombarded with traditional messages about masculinity and femininity, hour by hour, day by day. Again, Real uses the word traditional rather than patriarchal. Yet traditions, that's the end of the quote, but you can kind of tell when Bella's talking. Bell hooks. Again, Real uses the word traditional rather than patriarchal. Yet traditions are rarely hard to change. Literally, traditions are so not hard to change. I mean, look at Mardi Gras. New Orleans had a lot of traditions for Carnival, and coronavirus, it's a pandemic. We changed them. Instead of going out in crowds, day drinking with or without your kids to watch floats that other people put together, we decorated our own houses and or drove around or walked around or biked around the city just looking at stationary floats. Like, we were the ones who moved. Instead of us staying still and the floats moving by, we would move by and admire the floats for as long as you wanted. In a lot of ways, I prefer Mardi Gras. Another less regional example could be Kwanzaa. I did not grow up celebrating Kwanzaa, but this year it just seemed like a fun thing to study, and I think it's so cool. I know like 7 words in Swahili now. I know that Swahili is a Pan-African language now. It's a fun, educational, crafty holiday. I didn't like candles, but Kwanzaa's dope. Look it up. Anyway, traditions are rarely hard to change. What has been all but impossible to change is widespread cultural patriarchal propaganda. Yet we begin to protect the emotional well-being of boys and of all males when we call this propaganda by its true name, when we acknowledge that patriarchal culture requires that boys deny, suppress, and if all goes well, shut down their emotional awareness and their capacity to feel. Little boys are the only males in our culture who are allowed to be fully, wholly in touch with their feelings. Allowed moments when they can express without shame their desire to love and be loved. I gotta pause. Maybe my lack of experience with male identified people expressing their desire to love and be loved is so scarce because I'm not familiar with lots of little boys. Um, yeah, no siblings, only one male cousin, but we didn't really hang out a lot. I had a couple of male cousins, but they were already old enough to not express that desire by the time that we started hanging out. So I guess she means like really, really little boys. And the ones that are raised by anti-patriarchal parents. So keep up the good work. Millennials are changing some things. A lot of things ought to be changed. Like, it is a human thing to want to love and be loved. And I think it's really sad and unfair that boys and men don't feel like they're allowed to have that desire. And if they do have that desire, that they aren't allowed to express it, let alone, how would they know how? I'm just getting on a tangent. Am I ranting? Am I ranting? I don't have time to rant. This is kind of a long chapter. Let's go. If they are very, very lucky, they are able to remain connected to their inner selves or some part of their inner selves before they enter a patriarchal school system where rigid sex roles will be enforced by peers as rigorously as they are in any adult male prison. Those rare boys who happen to live in anti-patriarchal homes learn early to lead a double life. At home, they can feel and express and be. Outside the home, they must conform to the role of patriarchal boy. Patriarchal boys, like their adult counterparts, know the rules. They know they must not express feelings, with the exception of anger, that they must not do anything considered feminine or womanly. A national survey of adolescent males revealed their passive acceptance of patriarchal masculinity. Researchers found that boys agreed that to be truly manly, they must command respect, be tough, not talk about problems, and dominate females. Adolescent boys. Right. Back to the book. Every day across this country, boys consume mass media images that send them one message about how to deal with emotions, and that message is act out. Usually, acting out means aggression directed outward. Kicking, screaming, and hitting get attention. Since patriarchal parenting does not teach boys to express their feelings in words, either boys act out or they implode. Very few boys are taught to express with words what they feel when they feel it. And even when boys are able to express feelings in early childhood, they learn as they grow up that they are not supposed to feel, and they shut down. The confusion boys experience about their identity is heightened during adolescence. In many ways, the fact that today's boy often has a wider range of emotional expression in early childhood, but is forced to suppress emotional awareness later on, makes adolescence all the more stressful for boys. Tragically, were it not for the extreme violence that has erupted among teenage boys throughout our nation, the emotional life of boys would still be ignored. Although therapists tell us that mass media images of male violence and dominance teach boys that violence is alluring and satisfying, when individual boys are violent, especially when they murder randomly, pundits tend to behave as though it were a mystery why boys are so violent. Mass media images of male violence and dominance teach boys that violence is alluring and satisfying. Yet pundits tend to behave as though it were a mystery why boys are so violent. I just needed to play that back. Moving on. Progressive feminist research on adolescent males has debunked the heretofore accepted notion that it is natural for boys to go through an antisocial stage when they are Progressive feminist research on adolescent males has debunked the heretofore accepted notion that it is natural for boys to go through an antisocial stage where they disassociate and disconnect. Recent studies indicate that it is actually emotionally damaging to young males to be isolated and without emotional care or nurturance. In the past, it was assumed that aggression was part of the ritual of separation, a means for the growing boy to assert his autonomy. Yeah, just like letting your male babies cry it out is like, needed for his maleness. Oh, my connection. Okay, it's back. I just compared people accepting adolescent boys sort of self-isolating and dissociating as normal, the same way that people sort of accepted the practice of just letting their boys cry without giving them any comfort or nurturing, even as infants. It's very sad. Anyway, yet clearly, just as girls learn how to be autonomous and how to create healthy distance from parents without becoming antisocial, boys can do the same. In healthy families, boys are able to learn and assert autonomy without engaging in antisocial behavior, without isolating themselves. All over the world, terrorist regimes use isolation to break people's spirit. This weapon of psychological terrorism is daily deployed in our nation against teenage boys. In isolation, they lose the sense of their value and worth. No wonder, then, that when they re-enter a community, they bring with them killing rage as their primary defense. Even though masses of American boys will not commit violent crimes resulting in murder, the truth that no one wants to name is that all boys are being raised to be killers, even if they learn to hide that killer within and act as benevolent young patriarchs. More and more girls who embrace patriarchal thinking also embrace the notion that they must be violent to have power. Talking to teenage girls of all classes who are being secretly hit or beaten by their boyfriends, who say they are disciplining them, disciplining is in quotes, one hears the same Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde narratives that grown women tell when talking about their relationships with abusive men. These girls describe seemingly nice guys who have rageful outbursts. Time and time again, we hear on our national news about the seemingly kind, quiet young male whose violent underpinnings are suddenly revealed. Boys are encouraged by patriarchal thinking to claim rage as the easiest path to manliness. It should come as no surprise, then, that beneath the surface there is a seething anger in boys, a rage waiting for the moment to be heard. I have a question for the boys in the comments, the boys, the men, whoever. Do you feel like you've been encouraged to claim rage as your easiest path to manliness? When I read that, I was thinking, oh, what about sex? And then a bunch of rappers said, beat the pussy up in the back of my head. And I'm like, okay, sex and violence. We said it in the preface. Chapter 4 is on violence and chapter 5 is on sex. Just saying. Sex and violence. I'm so glad I'm not a man. I'm just going to move on from there. Like, why would you want to smush those two things together? They don't seem, it's like, I don't know. Like, there are contexts in which sex and violence at the same time can be consensual and fun. I mean, hello. but yeah, that, to me, that requires a level of emotional intelligence that boys are not encouraged to have. So it just opens up the floodgates for all kinds of abuse, including but not limited to rape culture. But anyway, is it because rage is the easiest path to manliness? Let me know in the comments below. Like I said, I don't know what it's like to have been raised a man. Yeah, it should come as no surprise then that beneath the surface there is a seething anger in boys, a rage waiting for the moment to be heard. Much of the anger boys express is itself a response to the demand that they not show any other emotions. Anger feels better than numbness because it often leads to more instrumental action. Anger can be, and usually is, the hiding place for fear and pain. In The Heart of the Soul, authors Gary Zukav and Linda Francis explore the ways anger barricades the feeling self. Block quote. Anger prevents love and isolates the one who is angry. It is an attempt, often successful, to push away what is most longed for: companionship and understanding. It is a denial of the humanness of others as well as a denial of your own humanness. Anger is the agony of believing that you are not capable of being understood and that you are not worthy of being understood. It is a wall that separates you from others as effectively as if it were concrete, thick, and very high. There is no way through it, under it, or over it. Certainly, end quote. Certainly, in almost all the situations where boys have killed, we discover narratives of rage that describe the emotional realities before they happen. Importantly, this anger is expressed across a broad spectrum of class, race, and family circumstance. Violent boys from affluent homes often are as emotionally alienated as their ghetto counterparts. At a time in our nation's history when more boys than ever are being raised in single-parent, female-headed homes, mass media send the message that a single mother is unfit to raise a healthy boy child. All over our nation, mothers worry that their parenting may be damaging their sons. This is the issue Olga Silverstein tackles head-on in The Courage to Raise Good Men. Commenting that many people still believe that mothers compromise their sons' masculinity, she writes, quote, "Most women, like most men, feel that a mother's influence will ultimately be harmful to a male child, that it will weaken him, and that only the example of a man can lead a son into manhood. Single mothers in particular are haunted by the dread of producing a sissy." End quote. Homophobia! Here it is. Been waiting to hear that word. Been waiting to see it. We don't love to see homophobia, but we love to see it being talked about. Bell Hooks writes, "Homophobia underlies the fear that allowing boys to feel will turn them gay. This fear is often most intense in single-parent homes. As a consequence, mothers in these families may be overly harsh and profoundly emotionally withholding with their sons, believing that this treatment will help the boys to be more masculine." That's why the problem of equating masculinity with being emotionally withholding is a problem, because it doesn't make you more masculine. Obviously, women are doing it, but it just makes you more emotionally withholding. It shows that as the norm, which, if that's all it takes to be masculine, I mean, they're right, they're successful. Nobody's free. I'm sorry, I gotta move on. It just makes me so uncomfortable. Believing that this treatment will help the boys to be more masculine. Bell Hooks continues, "No matter that information abounds that lets the public know that many gay males come from two-parent homes and can be macho and woman-hating, misguided assumptions about what makes a male gay still flourish. Every day, boys who express feelings are psychologically terrorized, and in extreme cases, brutally beaten by parents who fear that a man of feeling must be homosexual. Gay men share with straight men the same notions about acceptable masculinity. Just ask Grindr." Grindr didn't exist in 2004. That was me. Okay, good. You can't see my. Anyway. So, yeah, gay men share with straight men the same notions about acceptable masculinity. Luckily, there have been and are individual gay men who dare to challenge patriarchal masculinity. However, most gay men in our culture are as embracing of sexist thinking as heterosexuals. Argue with me in the comments. Truly, I would love to have evidence to the contrary, but I haven't seen it. So here we go. Bell Hooks continues. Their patriarchal thinking leads them to construct paradigms of desire similar to that of patriarchy. Hence, many gay men are as angry as their straight counterparts. Just as maternal sadism flourishes in a world where women are made to feel that their emotional cruelty to sons makes them better prepared for manhood, paternal sadism is the natural outcome of patriarchal values. In the book, The Man I Might Become, Gay Men Write About Their Fathers, edited by Bruce Schnitz, many of the stories of boyhood describe rituals of paternal sadism. As James Saslow writes in Daddy Was a Hot Number, it's the name of one of the short stories or the essays. It's a good title. It's a great title. I would, if I were reading that book, The Man I Might Become, Gay Men Write About Their Fathers, and you go to the contents and you see one that's called Daddy Was a Hot Number, I'm flipping to that page. So go off, sis. James Saslow writes, all children suffer that aching stab of inadequacy. Wow. All children suffer that aching stab of inadequacy when Papa turns his face away. It's just twice as sharp when he's your object of desire, as well as your mentor and role model. Only mother love is unconditional, but fatherly love is also about licking the child into shape. Fathers challenge and then judge us, their role in socializing the next generation. In this mythic battle of wills, persuasion and example are the preferred weapons, but if they don't work, the drill sergeant will have to unleash the A-bomb of familial warfare, rejection. End quote. Most patriarchal fathers in our nation do not use physical violence to keep their sons in check. They use various techniques of psychological terrorism, the primary one being the practice of shaming. Patriarchal fathers cannot love their sons because the rules of patriarchy dictate that they stand in competition with their sons, ready to prove that they are the real man, the one in charge. In his essay, Finding the Light and Keeping It in Front of Me, Bob Vance describes walking behind his father as a boy, longing to connect, but knowing intuitively that no connection was possible. Quote, something inhibits me from asking him for what I need. I know if a very young boy can intuit such things, that I am left out of this world and am somehow forbidden to ask him what I can do to have him take me into his world, to hold me playfully or tenderly. The rift begins here. This is the earliest memory I have of my father. End quote. To the patriarchal dad, sons can only be regarded as recruits in training. Hence, they must constantly be subjected to sadomasochistic power struggles designed to toughen them up, to prepare them to maintain the patriarchal legacy. As sons, they inhabit a world where fathers strive to keep them in the one-down position. As patriarchs in training, they must learn how to assume a one-up role. Terrence Real explains, sustaining relationships with others requires a good relationship to ourselves. Healthy self-esteem is an internal sense of worth that pulls one neither into better than grandiosity nor less than shame. Contempt is why so many men have such trouble staying connected. Since healthy self-esteem, being neither one up nor one down, is not yet a real option, and since riding in the one down position elicits disdain in oneself and in others, most men learn to hide the chronic shame that dogs them, running from their own humanity and from closeness to anyone else along with it. I've read this chapter at least 3 or 4 times, and that still hits me so hard. It's ugh. Anyway, Bell Hooks continues. That's the end of what Terrence Real had to say. For now, he's a recurring guest star in this book. Bell Hooks continues. This flight from closeness is most intense in the lives of adolescent boys because in that liminal zone between childhood and young adulthood, they are experiencing a range of emotions that leave them feeling out of control, fearful that they will not measure up to the standards of patriarchal masculinity. Suppressed rage is the perfect hiding place for all of these fears. Despite major changes in gender roles in public life, in private, many boys are traumatized by relationships with distant or absent fathers. Working with groups of men, listening as they talk about boyhood, I hear the stories they tell about their father's lack of emotional connection. As they attempt to measure up to patriarchal expectations, many boys fear the wrath of the father. In Man Enough, Fathers, Sons, and the Search for Masculinity, Frank Pittman recalls, quote, fearing I didn't have enough of it, I was in awe of masculinity. I thought my father had some magical power and he wasn't passing on to me, a secret he hadn't told me, end quote. A masculine ideal that young males are not sure how to attain and that undermines their self-esteem. And the crisis of this longing seems most deeply felt by boys with absent fathers. Without a positive connection to a real adult man, they are far more likely to invest in a hypermasculine patriarchal ideal. Fear of not being able to attain the right degree of manliness is often translated into rage. Many teenage boys are angry because the fantasy, emotional connection between father and son, the love that will be there, is never realized. In its place, there is just an empty space of empty longing. Ooh, that's a little too much prose. You just mess it up reading it out loud. It was so poignant. Anyway, I'll go back one sentence. Ooh, girl, I'll go back 2 sentences. Fear of not being able to attain the right degree of manliness is often translated into rage. Many teenage boys are angry because the fantasy emotional connection between father and son, the love that they imagine will be there, is never realized. In its place, there is just a space of empty longing. Even when it becomes evident that the fantasy will not be fulfilled, that the father wound will not be healed, boys hold on to the longing. It may give them a sense of quest and purpose to feel they will someday find the father, or, through having children, become the father they dream about. Frustrated in their quest for father bonding, boys often feel tremendous sorrow and depression. They can mask these feelings because they are allowed to isolate themselves, to turn away from the world and escape into music, television, video games, etc. There is no emotional outlet for the grief of the disappointed teenage boy. Being able to mourn the loss of emotional connection with his father would be a healthy way to cope with disappointment, but boys have no space to mourn. This need for a space to grieve is poignantly portrayed in the film Life as a House. When he has cancer and only a short time to live, the father in the film seeks to connect with his sexually confused, angry, drug-using teenage son, who lives with his mother and stepfather. In the short time he lives with his dad, the son is able to develop an emotional connection. When the son finds out that his dad is going to last, I don't think she continues to talk about this movie, so I haven't seen Life as a House, but I totally identify with the teenage son because how are you going to wait like more than 10 years to try to have a relationship with me and you're only doing it because you're about to die? That's the most selfish thing I mean, come on. I guess in the net worth of it all, it's probably a net positive. but it's also traumatizing as fuck, and no kid deserves that. And you're not even gonna be upfront with him and say like, "Hey, move in with me because I'm dying from cancer." You're just gonna be like, "Hey, move in with me. I want a relationship with you. Oh, by the way, I'm dying of cancer." Men be like, that's it's very realistic, actually. So I'm sure it's wonderful. Books continues. In Donald Dutton's study of abusive men, connection is unstable. Please wait while we try reconnecting. Cool. In Donald Dutton's study of abusive men, The Batterer, he observes that there are few male models for grieving, and he emphasizes that, quote, men in particular seem incapable of grieving and mourning on an individual basis. Trapped by a world that tells them boys should not express feelings, teenage males have nowhere to go where grief is accepted, end quote. As much as grown-ups complain about adolescent male anger, most adults are more comfortable confronting a raging teenager than one who's overwhelmed by sorrow and cannot stop weeping. She did say most. I hold space for both. You know, I'm also technically a trained professional, but say it again, bell hooks. As much as grown-ups complain about adolescent male anger, most adults are more comfortable confronting a raging teenager, usually with like dominance, like, oh, you're mad? Well, you don't pay the bills around here, so I'm going to dominate you and make you angrier, yay. Versus than one who is overwhelmed by sorrow and cannot stop weeping. Here's an idea. Hold them, tell them their feelings are valid. I don't know. Bell Hooks continues. Boys learn to cover up grief with anger. The more troubled the boy, the more intense the mask of indifference. Shutting down emotionally is the best defense when the longing for connection must be denied. I literally drew a frowny face in pencil. I don't mark books with pen. But I literally drew a frowny face. It's so sad. In the next couple of sentences, I wrote, yup, exclamation point next to, like, in the margin. Let's see what it has to say. It says, teenagers are the most unloved group in our nation. Teenagers are often feared precisely because they are often exposing the hypocrisy of parents and the world around them. Yup, I still stand by that. That is definitely a amen. Amen, bell hooks. Teenagers are often feared precisely because they're often exposing the hypocrisy of parents and of the world around them. And no group of teenagers is more feared than a pack of teenage boys. You know, yeah, I have time for this. I want to talk about hypocrisy and how when you're a teen, you're in this, she calls it a liminal space. You're in a transitional period between childhood and adulthood. Be authentic and have fantasy and then like imagine whatever we want the world to be, and people let that happen. As teenagers, you carry that into like you're starting to learn more and more about the world of adulthood, and you're like, what do you mean women make 75 cents for every dollar? What do you mean cops just shoot people of color for no reason? What do you mean they're not calling white people terrorists when they do terrorist shit? Like, what? Like, what do you... Teenagers ask really challenging questions. And as a parent, just trying to like, whether you're maintaining status quo or not, I'm sure you're a busy adult. And to be challenged, to have your whole worldview challenged by somebody that you still view as a child is scary. It's actually scary. Oh my gosh, I have a comment. I've heard teenage boys say they want kids so that they can be there for their kids. Jessica's saying amen again to the hypocrisy too. Thank you, Jessica. Teenage boys say they want kids so they can be there for their kids. Right. Hopefully they're not conceiving these children right now. Hopefully they are like looking for a stable partnership or multiple partnership. etc. Because and also I think they're directing that attention outward because what they mean to say is, I wish I had better parents, but as boys, they're not allowed to say, hey, I have emotional needs. So instead, they're like, I can do better. And maybe you could, but maybe you should also have therapy first. Um, yeah, free universal healthcare. Please include therapy. Just saying. We all need a little bit of reparenting because guess what? Nobody's parents are perfect because guess what? Everybody's parents are human beings. Yeah, after you get to a certain age, you kind of just gotta go back and fill in your own gaps. You don't have to do it alone, but it is your responsibility. And I hope that all of those teenage boys are considering that step before they jump into fatherhood. Please, God. Please, God. But yeah, let's move on. No group of teenagers is more feared than a pack of teenage boys. Emotionally abandoned by parents and by society as a whole, many boys are angry, but no one really cares about this anger unless it leads. I care. Talk about it. If you're an angry teenage boy and nobody wants to listen to you, let's talk about it in the comments. I'm positive that your feelings are valid. Try me. If they're not, no, but chances are your feelings are valid. Let's have a conversation. Express your anger with your words. Don't abuse people on the internet. Just like talk about how you feel. Back to bell hooks. Yeah, no one really cares about this anger unless no one except Ashley Gemini really cares about this anger unless it leads to violent behavior. If boys take their rage and sit in front of a computer all day, never speaking, never relating, no one cares. If boys take their rage to the mall, no one cares. Daddy, what's a mall? What mall? It's a pandemic. Bell hooks, this is written in 2004. Leave her alone. If boys take their rage to the mall, no one cares, as long as it is contained. In Lost Boys, therapist James Garbarino testifies that when it comes to boys, quote, neglect is more common than abuse. More kids are emotionally abandoned than are directly attacked, physically or emotionally, end quote. Emotional neglect lays the groundwork for the emotional numbing that helps boys feel better about being cut off. Oof. Oof. Yeah. It's the invalidation that does it. The mechanism behind the sentence that I'm about to reread is the emotional because as humans, I was going to say as children, but as humans, it's a natural need to be sort of corroborated with the people around you, right? Like, this is a jar of feathers, right? I'm not crazy. Cool. It's nice to have somebody agree with you that your reality is real. So because we don't validate boys' emotions, I'll go back and reread it. Emotional neglect lays the groundwork for the emotional numbing that helps boys feel better about being cut off. If everyone else is ignoring your feelings, then it makes sense for you to ignore them too. You know, children accept the reality that we give them. And if you give them the reality that your feelings aren't important, then they internalize that their feelings aren't important. Ouch! Bell hooks continues. Eruptions of rage in boys are most often deemed normal, explained by the age-old justification for adolescent patriarchal misbehavior. Boys will be boys. Patriarchy both creates the rage in boys and then contains it for later use, making it a resource to exploit later on as boys become. Stay tuned, it gets deep. As a national product, this rage can be garnered to further imperialism, hatred, and oppression of women and men globally. This rage is needed if boys are to become men willing to travel around the world to fight wars without ever demanding that other ways of solving conflicts be found. Why is this book so thick and heavy? That's all that we need to say. Truly, that ties in the imperialism component of the imperialist, white supremacist, capitalist, ableist patriarchy. Yeah, as a national product, this rage can be garnered to further imperialism, hatred, and oppression of women and men globally. This rage is needed if boys are to become men willing to travel around the world to fight wars without ever demanding that other ways of solving conflict be found. Ever since masses of American boys began in the wake of the civil rights struggle, sexual liberation, and feminist movement to demand their right to be psychologically whole, and expressed those demands most visibly by refusing to fight in the Vietnam War, because can you be emotionally whole and fight in a war at the same time? Let me know in the comments below. My guess is no. Mass media as a propaganda tool for imperialist, white supremacist, capitalist, ableist patriarchy have targeted young males and engaged in heavy-handed brainwashing to reinforce psychological patriarchy. Girl, she's talking about the backlash. She's talking about the backlash. It's a long sentence, and I'm going to read it more slowly and not interrupt. I do add ableist. Bell Hooks only talks about the imperialist, white supremacist, capitalist patriarchy. But it's literally all the same system. Ever since masses of American boys began, in the wake of the civil rights struggle, sexual liberation, and feminist movement, to demand their right to be psychologically whole and express those demands most visibly by refusing to fight in the Vietnam War, mass media as a propaganda tool for imperialist, white supremacist, capitalist, ableist patriarchy have targeted young males and engaged in heavy-handed brainwashing to reinforce psychological patriarchy. Today, small boys and young men are daily inundated with a poisonous pedagogy that supports male violence and male domination, that teaches boys that unchecked violence is acceptable, that teaches them to disrespect and hate women. Given this reality and the concomitant emotional abandonment of boys, it should be no surprise. It should surprise no one that boys are violent, that they are willing to kill. It should surprise us that the killing is not yet widespread. Ruthless patriarchal assault on the self-esteem of teenage boys has become an accepted norm. There is a grave silence about adult male tyranny in relation to teenage boys. Much of the adult male terrorism of and competition with little boys and young males is conducted through mass media. Much of the mass media directed at young male consumers is created by self-hating, emotionally shut down adult men who have only the pornography of violence to share with younger men. To that end, they create images that make killing alluring and the sexual exploitations of females the seductive reward. In the wake of feminist, anti-racist, and post-colonial critiques of imperialist, white supremacist, capitalist, ableist patriarchy, the backlash that aims to reinscribe patriarchy is fierce. Practice, y'all. That is a tongue twister. I think that's the fastest I've ever said that. I'm going to try to say it with a straight face now. In the wake of feminist, anti-racist, and post-colonial critiques of imperialist, white supremacist, capitalist, ableist patriarchy, the backlash that aims to reinscribe patriarchy is fierce. While feminism may ignore boys and young males, capitalist, patriarchal men do not. Trigger warning for anybody who stands Harry Potter. She's about to go in on your girl. Okay, look. She's about to go in. As an example, Bell Hooks continues, it was adult, white, wealthy males in this country who first read and fell in love with the Harry Potter books. Though written by a British female, initially described by the rich white American men who discovered her as a working-class single mom, J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter books, the whole collection. J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter books are clever modern reworkings of the English schoolboy novel. Harry, as our modern-day hero, is the super smart, gifted, blessed, white boy genius, a mini patriarch, who rules over the equally smart kids, including an occasional girl and an occasional male of color, and Cho Chang, which, by the way, naming the singular Asian character in your book of like 7 deep books series, Cho Chang, just screams, I have no Asian friends. Like, do you know any Asian people? Is Cho even a girl's name in Chinese? Comment below. That's a genuine question out of ignorance. I could look that up, but I'm live and it's already been over an hour. So yeah, including an occasional girl and an occasional male of color. That's a read. But these books also glorify war, depicted as killing on behalf of the good. The Harry Potter movies glorify the use of violence to maintain control over others. In Harry Potter, the Chamber of Secrets, violence when used by the acceptable groups is deemed positive. Sexism and racist thinking in Harry Potter books are rarely critiqued, at least as of 2004. Had the author been a ruling class white male, feminist thinkers might have been more active in challenging the imperialism, racism, ableism, and sexism of Rowling's books. Again and again, I hear parents, particularly anti-patriarchal parents, express concern about the contents of these books while praising them for drawing more boys to reading. Of course, American children were bombarded with an advertising blitz telling them that they should read these books. Harry Potter began as national news sanctioned by mass media. Books that do not reinscribe patriarchal masculinity do not get the approval the Harry Potter books have received. And children rarely have an opportunity to know that any books exist which offer an alternative to patriarchal masculinist visions. The phenomenal financial success of Harry Potter means that boys will henceforth have to choose from. Reading. Bell Hooks, she's reading. Jessica says, LMAO, read, honey. It's the reading rainbow over here. Okay. Phenomenal financial success of Harry Potter means that boys will henceforth have an array of literary clones to choose from. Artemis Fowl comes to mind, but I'm not sure if that came out after Harry Potter. There is I don't know if it's feminist, but it's a lot less problematic in my opinion. If you enjoy Harry Potter and you don't mind having a mostly female cast, My Little Witch Academia is literally Harry Potter, but with more people of color, and at least somebody's chubby on there. Like, it's a step in the diversity direction. It's Harry Potter without the imperialism and with a cup and a half of diversity. We'll give her that. Not sponsored. Bell Hooks continues, and these are the last 2 pages, I promise. Literature for children is just as fixated on furthering patriarchal attitudes as television. There are just a few books with male characters focusing on boys that challenge the patriarchal norm in any way. Since these books do not abound, there is no way to know what impact they might have in teaching boys alternative masculinities. Writing a series of children's books for boys, shameless plug, you get it, Bell Hooks. I didn't know she had a children's book series, so let us know. Writing a series of children's books for boys. I was initially amazed by how difficult it was for me, a visionary feminist theorist, to imagine new images and texts for boys. Shopping for books for my nephew first alerted me to the absence of progressive literature for boys. In my first children's book with male characters, Boy Buzz, I wanted to celebrate boyhood without reinscribing patriarchal norms. I wanted to write a text that would just express love for boys. It is a book aimed at little boys. This book strives to honor the holistic well-being of boys and to express love of them, whether they are laughing, acting out, or just sitting still. The books I have written are aimed at offering boys ways to cope with their emotional selves. The point is to stimulate in boys emotional awareness and to affirm that awareness. To truly protect and honor the emotional lives of boys, we must challenge patriarchal culture. And until that culture changes, we must create the subcultures, the sanctuaries, where boys can learn to be who they are uniquely, without being forced to conform to patriarchal masculine visions. To love boys rightly, we must value their inner lives enough to construct worlds, both private and public, where their right to wholeness can be consistently celebrated and affirmed, where their need to love and be loved can be fulfilled. Oh, thanks, Bell Hooks. We appreciate you. Somebody's got to do it. I'm so glad that there's a visionary radical feminist writing literature for young boys. Final thoughts. Oh no, it's dead air. I'm live. I can't have the dead air, y'all. Still waiting on my computer to come in the mail. When I bought it, they said it wouldn't be shipped until April 5th. And then a couple days later, like, it's on the way, but we won't tell you the tracking number or when to expect it. So I'm like, are you yanking my chain? What is this? Just give me a date. Like, I would love to know when I will have my computer back so I can edit videos. I miss editing. This is my third live stream ever, and I feel pretty comfortable with it. And I look forward to seeing y'all in the next one. Please leave your comments. I love having a discussion about this book. It has changed my life, and I hope that whoever's listening or reading along with me feels seen and heard. I may end up repeating this in every video, but men are not the problem. Patriarchy is the problem. Men are people. They're human beings. Humans aren't perfect. Humans are not robots. We are not beholden to our programming. We can change. We really can. What's that quote in the beginning where it's like, it's not that we have the will to change. Yeah, Harriet Lerner. It is the will to change that motivates us to seek help. It is the fear of change that motivates us to resist the very help we seek. So, yeah, it's okay to be afraid. Let's talk about it in the comments below. Yesterday, I guess, I challenged anyone to name any problem that you have, and we'll trace it back to the patriarchy, like how the system of imperialist, white supremacist, capitalist, ableist patriarchy is at the root of every single problem. My friend and I told her about it. It's like 6 degrees of separation from the patriarchy, and she's like, 6? You mean 3? And we struggled to get to 2. Literally any random problem you can think of, maybe 2 degrees of separation from patriarchy. Let's play this game in the comments below. Let me know whatever it is that you're feeling. So I'm here for it. Your feelings are valid. I appreciate your attention, and I can't wait to make the next one. Thank you all so much. Peace.